So C4WS Homeless Project's been running in Camden since 2005, I believe. So we're now in our 17th year of running services, and we support people who are homeless in the local area to access housing, employment, healthcare, and any need that's essentially going to enable them to exit homelessness and lead stable lives that also prevent a return to homelessness. So once someone leaves us, we carry on supporting them for really as long as they say they need and they want. And so the main projects that we run is a winter shelter, which runs between November and March each year. And that originated from within the church community in Camden. So we would use different church spaces to operate our shelter. This is called a rolling model, which means that one night a week, a different church would host it, and our guests, which is the phrase we always use to describe people we support, would move night on night. And that involves around 1,000 volunteers from the local community supporting that. And it's a really sort of well-run, oiled machine, but sadly due to COVID last year, that had to stop because it's communal sleeping, it's moving around venues. So we ended up having to operate what we're calling a static shelter. So that means that we took over a venue in Euston, and we operated that for nearly 4 months, and our guests could come and stay there, which had lots of benefits because it wasn't having to move night on night. It wasn't communal sleeping. Everyone got their own room, everyone got their own bathroom facilities as well. And it being 24/7 meant that they could stay there all day, which again, with the old model, it used to close at 9 in the morning. And would reopen at 7:30 p.m. So there's quite a big chunk of the day, which particularly, in the coldest months of the year, it's really hard. You've got to take all your bags, stay warm. So, lots of really beneficial impacts from running that model, but also quite a lot of challenges, going from only being open in the night to open 24/7, the volume of work. So I think a couple of things, like a lot of projects similar to us that run temporary accommodation in the winter just closed. They couldn't open, they couldn't find ways of opening, they couldn't finance it. So already there were less projects pan-London available. And then we ended up, so we normally operate 16 bed spaces a night. So we upped it to 20 for this year. And it feels like an extra 4 doesn't sound that much, but we really felt the impact of that. And I think one of the things we really noticed on top of all of that was we're pretty successful in moving people on from the shelter into accommodation. Like the last 3 years, it's been in excess of 90%. The move on this year was really hard. And that was primarily because a lot of services were closed. So places where we'd normally refer to housing, they weren't operating, or because of COVID, and it's called the everyone in policy, it meant that there weren't any voids. So whereas people might naturally be moving out of housing onto perhaps next stage accommodation in their lives, they were staying in supported housing projects. So they didn't have voids for us to refer to. So people ended up probably staying with us longer. I think on average they stayed 9 days longer than last year. And that move on was really difficult to try and find that for people. So we had more people in need, and then it was also harder to source accommodation. Firstly, I just have to say Camden Giving are amazing. We've worked with them for a long time, and as grant givers, I just feel like they're so ahead of the game. And last year when COVID first happened in March, they reached out immediately and were like, how can we help? What can we do? What resources do you need? They're very flexible, and understanding their projects is really good. So with the Pathways into Employment, that kind of built on those habits. So the idea behind that was, obviously it's funding employment opportunities for people. And what we asked was, it's very, very difficult for us to support people into employment if they haven't got stable housing. So can we combine a model of funding that pays for their housing as well as their employment? So what that ended up looking like was the funding we got was to support 10 people who would come into our shelter in the winter, and then that would pay for their time in the shelter. So the cost of their accommodation, their food, toiletries, clothing, all of the sort of the basics that you need. And when you've got those, you're much better able to focus on your employment. If you're trying to worry about where you're staying that night or how you're going to afford to, buy your next set of clothes, And then with those 10 people, they then accessed our Jobs Club, which is a separate project we run. And we, this year, because of the nature of the shelter model, we actually run a lot of it in-house. So again, it was really good. People come from their room downstairs to the Jobs Club hub and work with our employment support coordinator to get into employment. So that was the funding I think like last autumn that we applied for.
Yeah.
When we opened the shelter, you know, we went into national lockdown where there were no employment opportunities. So working with those 10 people, it changed quite a lot. And I think we did a really good job because we were able to use that time whilst they were in the shelter to work on their upskilling. So helping them refine their CVs, understand how better to search for employment, practicing interview techniques, you know, practicing filling out application forms and getting feedback on, you know, why this might not be, you know, the perfect answer and how they could do that. And also trying to upskill them in terms of, you know, look, the next couple of months looks really bleak for employment, but here's some qualifications you could do online. Here's a laptop we can link you up with while you're in the shelter. You know, you can do this course and that will look really good. So we ended up doing quite a lot of that and really, really resourcing people. And then when the employment market started opening up, those 10 people were really, really well positioned. Actually, that's wrong because we did get some of those 10 people into employment before then. So, for example, we got a young guy into work with the testing centres. You know, that was one of the few places that needed quite a lot of roles filled quite quickly. And, you know, another person got into employment through Deliveroo because everyone was just buying online food. So, you know, and our support around that looked very different. It was about helping fund a bike for him, helping fund, you know, safety gear. So he had lights, helmet, so that he could do that. I think it's a brilliant model and I think it works really well. I think it helps level the playing field for smaller charities as well. You know, I think sometimes the difficulty about sourcing funding is, you know, we've only got 4 staff members and we're all frontline workers. So in terms of marketing, communicating ourselves, we don't have anyone specific to do that. It's just us as and when we can. And so quite often we lose out to bigger organizations who've got a fundraising team, a marketing team who are able to communicate that and get information. So I think the model of Camden Giving is brilliant because it means that people who already are in their local community know about, first, they know about the issues. So they know that homelessness in Camden's a big issue. But secondly, they also know about the projects working in this. They're able to really make their decisions based on a localized level and not judge, have we got some glossy PDF that we can send in for our funding? And prior to this round of funding, I think it was probably 2 summers ago before COVID-19, we met a group of the participants. So they asked to come in and understand, and it was brilliant. I actually felt a little bit grilled by it. So I ran it. They came into the office. There was 8 of them, and they really knew what they were talking about. So they knew the issues of homelessness, but they wanted to know what we were doing. You know, were we looking at this? Why weren't we looking at that? And I found it really, really informative, and it was brilliant because I felt they then went away with even more knowledge and understanding of the issues. And that's, you know, whether or not that would contribute to funding us in the future or not. It means if they're going out and meeting organisations and saying, what do you do? Then when they're making the decisions, they're making the best decisions in terms of who they're funding to. They're not making it on purely the application in front of you. And I think that is really powerful. We've actually had a former guest join one of the panels in the past. And she speaks, you know, first of all, that is just, you know, it's a full circle. It's so lovely. A project that Camden Giving funds and supports a young woman who's now able to join one of their groups and input. That's also given her huge life skills. It's really transformed her confidence because she's part of a group of 8 people and she has to stand up and say what she thinks. And I've really seen her blossom with that. So I think it's sort of feeding back in. So we've actually just had the updated operating guidance from government about shelters, and they have said again this winter we're not able to run the rolling shelter model, i.e. the church base where you move. So that is nationwide. So I think all projects like us are trying to work out what to do. And so our plan is to operate a static model. Again, it worked really well last year. The difficulty is twofold. One is availability. So last year, loads of hotels were closed because of lockdown. So they were available for homeless charity to use. This winter, they're not. And it's probably unlikely they're going to go into a strict lockdown. So they don't want to ring fence spaces that they can get paying customers into. And secondly, as brilliant as the project was to run, the churches we've used in the past, they provide for free the venues, the food, the laundry. That's part of their commitment.
Yeah.
All of those costs came on us this year. So, you know, we're talking like an extra 150 grand on our budget, which, you know, is a decision as a small charity we have to make about if this is going to be the type of funding we need, then we need to be able to raise that each year, because that's a new thing. Last year, there were a few emergency grants that enabled us to just about get by. This year, there's not going to be emergency grants available from the government. Having a purpose and having a sense of meaning, you know, it's quite a soft factor, but we really see that being transformational in people. Because if you're just sat around all day just waiting for the world to change so that you can get back on with life, it becomes quite a depressing, claustrophobic, powerless place. At least if you're going out each day, going to work, you come back, and then when you sit down for dinner with us and with our volunteers, you've got something to talk about and you feel really proud. You go, oh, today this like really funny thing happened at work. And I'm like, oh, tell me more, because I'm not working. And, you know, that gives someone self-confidence. It opens their networks up. It reduces isolation. All of those things are really powerful. So I'm a South London boy, and I work in North London. So when I first took this job, I knew nothing about Camden, and I think the thing that struck me was the sense of community that exists within the borough. And it's a really diverse community, and there's pockets of communities. You know, you've got Camden as a borough, but you've also got Somerstown, and you've got you know, Highgate. You know, you've got very different, like Hampstead. Like there's all these pockets, but you know, the ability of people to come together in that community from completely different backgrounds and work together was just so inspirational. I remember walking into the shelter on my first night and just thinking, I can't believe there's like 25 different people here. Like 3 of them have made a shepherd's pie. Like 2 of them have like brought in flowers to decorate the table. Like 1 of them speaks Polish because, you know, they want a Polish speaker to speak with our Polish guests. And I was like, the incredible talent and diversity and the will of people. And I think, you know, I guess our project is quite good because it tapped into lots of different people, and they can, you know, come once a week or once a month. And so through that, I've just met this incredible community of people who are able to give and give back. And yeah, I think that's just, it's so inspirational. And I think it really goes under the radar. I don't think you always necessarily see that. Like I think sometimes when you think of Camden, you think of the Lock, or you think of like all the developments going on in King's Cross, and there's this community underneath it that is really working to support vulnerable people, and it's really, I think that's probably my favorite thing.